We want to be able to allow for influencers to be able to share some good financial literacy advice, but at the same time, it's also important that they don't share advice which will be harmful.
Recent trend is that the commercialization of mentoring. Right? People are charging for mentoring. What is your perspective on that? Because it's totally out of line with everything that MentoringSG represents.
Welcome back to another episode of Wise and Shine. I'm your host, Dawn Budget Babe, and this is Alec.
This is Alex Low. You can find me on socials, Alex Low, Growth Mindset Coach. And our topic today is very, very exciting. So I'm Growth Mindset Coach, so I do quite a lot of
It's
coaching.
your area.
Right? Yeah, my area. And I've done a lot of mentoring since my teacher days. So it's been more than 20 years of doing that. But we have someone who's also very, very active and involved in that space today as our guest.
And pushing out this message.
And pushing out the message of mentoring and why it is so important. MOS Alvin, thank you for being on set today.
Well, hi everyone. I'm Alvin. I am MP as well as Minister of State for Trade, Industry, as well as Culture, Community and Youth. And I also sit on the board of the MAS, and that's why the SG Budget Babe is very important as we think about financial literacy and financial planning. But today, with Alex and with Dawn, what we're doing is talking about a very important topic that's close to my heart, which is mentoring.
And I think Dawn has a question to ask
before
as well.
we go there, now that you mention
she's
it,
SG
I
Budget
emailed
Babe.
you, I don't know if you remember.
This is on roll.
Ask, so influencers like me and Financial Coconut need to be regulated or not for the record?
I has already answered that for the record in Parliament. You can look at my Parliament speech.
Like we get that message, you know.
I
What the
know.
problem is that the interpretation of everyone else
Yes.
is different, and everyone claims that their interpretation is correct. So it's
That's
been
right.
it's been a field day, man, ever since that came out.
So I introduced the term finfluencers in Parliament because one of my colleagues, Melvin Yong, had asked that question about finfluencers. And we think that we want to be able to allow for finfluencers to be able to share some good financial literacy advice, but at the same time, it's also important that they don't share advice which will be harmful. Yeah, so I think we need to think about in a way in which you don't want to be too regulatory on this front, but at the same time have a best practice. And I hope the finfluencer community will also take note because it's important. These are important life advice. Financial advice is very important, and so important to make sure that you give sound advice, prudent advice, and also timely advice to people.
I like to look at stocks. I know MAS is not very pro crypto, but encourages the technology.
Yes.
So as friends to friends, we can talk, or sometimes on social media, I can share my opinion about it. But if someone asks like, Dawn, should I buy Bitcoin now? I'm like, you need to decide. I don't know anything
Yes.
about your situation,
Yeah.
right? And they say, what's your opinion of Bitcoin? I could share, but I don't necessarily tell a person, you should put $10,000 into Bitcoin or $10,000 into Tesla stock, or, oh no, like this stock now undergoing some saga, pull out your money. I've never said something like that. So that's not crossing the line, isn't it?
The MAS's position on Bitcoin and cryptocurrency is that it is not suitable for retail investors. If you're institutional investors, go ahead if you think that that's important for your exposure to a particular asset class and for your exposure to a particular asset. I think go ahead to do it if it's part of your portfolio. But we have strongly and discouraged to be precise, retail investors to be involved with cryptocurrency. And as you rightly pointed out, the underlying technology behind cryptocurrency is Web3. And we think that there is a lot of potential for it. We have done a lot of work on that front. We've also looked at stablecoin, which is pegged to a particular fiat. And we think that one, at least you can redeem at par. But for cryptocurrency and for Bitcoin and other forms of cryptocurrency, we urge caution to retail investors because, I mean, as you know, now Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies have gone very high, but it has also gone very low, the crypto winter. So I think those volatility quite challenging for mom and pop or retail investors to stomach. So we urge in caution, and for influencers, please, when you dispense with that advice, be very mindful of who's taking it, and it can go both ways. Yeah, I'd rather that when we dispense financial literacy advice, be like I mentioned, be prudent and also be cautious.
Actually, we had a very interesting chat the other day, and we got some influencers here to talk about the topic. Interestingly, all three of us were pro-regulation. We were like, want to regulate, because then it will push those who are lousy influencers out. And the truth is, because, I mean, Reggie, come on, let's be honest, right? Our chief financial coconut behind the camera has a lot to say about fake gurus and very misleading financial advice, which is a lot, it's moving around online like rapid fire. And a lot of the times, the really questionable ones do not come from the more prominent influencers. I'm so sorry for hijacking
No
me there.
problem. Well, some people want to be finflu regulated, and
I don't
some
mind.
not.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
I legit don't mind,
yeah,
man.
but you know, the reason why, I mean, I know we're kind of like tangential, but it's an important topic, and some want to be regulated, like yourself. Some ask that others be regulated. I think we need to look at it holistically, and I can understand the reasons why, because should they be dispensing that kind of advice? I think at this moment that the most important is to ensure that those who have that platform do it well, and also give those who are receiving the advice financial literacy. Be mindful of what the advice is out there. As I mentioned, be prudent. And really, if it's too good to be true, it probably is.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so enough hijacking. I'm so
Enough.
sorry, but let's get back to the topic at hand, which is mentoring.
Yes,
But I have a
mentoring.
very important question, which is, why was there a need to even set up mentoring.sg?
Well, mentoring Lion Singapore was a precursor to mentoring.sg. And so there were a group of very, very passionate individuals who thought that mentoring was very important, including Glenn Lim, who looked after and is still leading Architects of Life. So those who are ex-offenders, for example. And he and members of the community thought that mentoring was incredibly important, not just for ex-offenders and not just for youth, but for youth in general and the broader community. So I worked with the early days with Mentoring Alliance Singapore, MASG. And then we decided that, hey, we started to see a lot more of these mentoring organizations start to sprout. You have Advisory Access, Astronauts Collective, many others, even the Growth Collective, Shane, as we mentioned earlier on. And many of them have a good objective to nurture, to groom, and to also mentor the next generation of youths. So we thought, why not expand into a national mentoring movement? And it's very much in line with what Prime Minister Lawrence had mentioned about with regards to Forward Singapore, a new social compact where Singaporeans can help to reinforce one another and to empower one another. And I think mentoring is such a powerful movement and such a powerful tool. DPM Lawrence Wong then, and now PM Lawrence Wong, launched the Mentoring Summit in 2022 and mentoring.sg. Now we are in our third year. Our National Mentoring Summit will take place later this year as part of SG60, and I think we have some really important guests coming. We've thus far managed to get a lot of mentors on board, including folks from the public sector, the private sector, and the nonprofit sector. And what we're trying to do is to foster this mentoring culture, connect mentees with mentors, so that, for example, if you are keen on a career in finance or in tech or engineering or aerospace, there is a mentor there to guide you and says, this is how I started in my role in finance or banking or in government, and provide, very sound advice along a young person's journey.
So it's very much centered for youth, or would you say that this mentoring would be actually anybody and anyone who requires some form of mentoring?
Yeah, so the beauty of mentoring is that it is intergenerational and it benefits the mentor as much as the mentee. So originally, I thought the focus has been, like I mentioned, on ex-offenders and youths. But in fact, every one of us needs mentoring. And many of us also benefit from being a mentor to some mentee, because the concept of reverse mentoring allows you to also learn from your mentee as well. For someone like me, I have mentees, but I also continue to have mentors that guide me. Like, I spend most of my career in the private sector. Now moving into government and political service, I've had mentors as well, and asking them for advice, and also following how they carry themselves, how they explain different things, how they think. I think it's a very, very valuable one for people of all different ages.
So for your case, for your mentors, was it one whereby they were assigned to you or you proactively reach out to them to ask for the mentorship?
Throughout my career in the private sector, I've had, bosses or colleagues that are senior to me, more experienced to me, whom I've become friends with, and who also took very intentional steps to look out for my well-being and to look out for my growth. And then it became a mentorship. So when I was in investment banking many years ago in Hong Kong, I was new to finance and investment banking, and my boss took it upon himself to mentor me. He said, I remember coming in and I said, well, I'm very new to finance. Can you teach me? And he said this. He said, well, Alvin, finance has a glossary. You will learn the language of finance. What are bonds? What are stocks? What are OTC derivatives? What are term sheets? And once you pick that language up, you'll find after a while that you get a hang of it. I still remember what he says till today. Another mentor when I was in the tech sector also always gave me very, very sound advice. And then she would always put me in front. So she would take the back seat, and I was younger than her, but she says, well, you can lead. So you take the seat at the table, I'll take the seat at the back. And I thought that was quite incredible because she empowered me. I was nervous, of course, but she says, I have faith in you. You go up, you deliver the pitch. I'm here if you need anything. So there are very different kinds of mentors. I'll share one particular mentor, which I always remembered. And he told me that whatever position you're in, either you might be a managing director in a global investment bank, you might be an ambassador, you might be a minister, but always remember that when you are taking on that particular role, at that particular office, it's just that particular season where you have been called to serve in that particular office. So don't conflate who you are, right? In this case, Alvin Tan, with your office. Because one day you will leave that office and you will entrust somebody else to take on that role. But I think many people, they conflate their titles, their roles, their excellency la, or minister la, or MD la, or whatever it is, your title, with who you are. And then it becomes conflated with your identity. And my mentor taught me actually that's not quite healthy. You are who you are for that particular season and time. You just have the opportunity to take on that role and you do your best in that role. And really, it just frees me up, because you're not thinking like, oh, this is my identity. I need to, reach this or reach that. But you are just so thankful that you're able to take on that particular role and you just give the best at that particular time.
That's a
It's
very
superb advice. Yeah.
timely advice, especially if we think about the layoffs that have been happening in the last 6 to 9 months. For everyone who has been laid off and then they go through that, grieving cycle and they talk about a loss of identity, if actually right from the start, this was the mindset, maybe that disconnect wouldn't be that big.
Yeah, well, layoffs are always very jarring. I've had experience where, my companies have shrunk. And I mean, growth stage, very good. Everybody's very happy. But, in the private sector, it can be volatile. It's very market driven. So I've seen and I've worked in companies where it's hyper growth. And then later on, people get let go or you get downsized, your teams get downsized. In the past, many years ago, I still remember my father getting retrenched and he came back and he was so dejected. So these things people experience that. The first reaction is empathy and understand that sometimes, regardless of what we said earlier on, our jobs can be our identities. It's very difficult to divorce that from who you are. But know that you can take a setback as a setup, which is another thing that some of my mentors told me. A setback can set you up for future success because you learn from the experience, you develop resilience, you develop ruggedness, and the next opportunity comes, you're ready to grab it.
That's the growth mindset.
That's the growth mindset. Yeah. Sorry, I think I picked his.
You were getting my mental waves
tagline.
here.
I got that mentoring wave from Alex. Yeah.
But what I'm hearing is that mentors do things from the goodness of their heart, right? And it's a two-way benefit. Recent years or recent trend is that the commercialization of mentoring. Right? People are charging for mentoring. What is your perspective on that? Because it's totally out of line with everything that MentoringSG represents.
Well, I think there is again, coming from the private sector, I'll just segment the market. That's my experience. That's my instinct. So you kind of segment the market a little bit. I think there is a role for coaching, like professional coaching. So I've seen, and in fact, the CEOs, right? So my colleagues who have been running businesses, They are very senior. They are CEOs, they are chairman of the bank or very senior leaders in the tech space. I mean, these are the two areas which I worked in. And over time, at a particularly senior level, you can benefit from coaching. Yeah. And so that coaching and there's a market for it, and you can pay a professional coach to come and teach you a few things, which could be your blind spots. For example, public speaking, right? So maybe some leaders need coaching as you go up the ranks. Nobody teaches you how to be a manager or a leader, and maybe you need that. And I think you pay for somebody who do that. And I also wanted to say a piece for the particular coach as very distinct from a mentor, right? That coach who provides that service ought also to be remunerated. I mean, it's a particular skill set. You're taking your time. We talked about that sustainability thing earlier on, financial sustainability. Why not pay for that service? It's a very, very important service. Now, that I think is a little bit distinct from mentoring as a whole, where that mentoring relationship can be informal. It does, right? So that informal mentoring relationship and people who derive a lot of benefit from that mentoring relationship, I think there's a place for that. And that's what MentoringSG represents. If you are a mentor and you want to give back and look for a mentee, we have a platform to connect you. We have programs to connect you. I think that works. If you're a mentee looking for a mentor and it's not so easy, then we connect you with a mentor, and we have programs and workshops for you to be connected to somebody in that particular field. So I think coaching is one, and I think you ought to be remunerated if you're providing a professional service. But mentoring is one which is sometimes formal, sometimes informal, and now we also see the emergence of flash mentoring, right? You don't want to have a long-term mentoring relationship, but you say, I just do a flash mentoring, maybe 15 minutes, 10 minutes, just to learn from you, learn what you are doing in terms of, finance, financial literacy, or in a growth mindset. And I gain that particular insight for 15 minutes, flash mentoring.
Actually, why is that called mentoring? I thought that is just called, let's have lim kopi. Yeah, lim kopi and share.
Yeah, it's a really important question because actually that one is, we can call it socializing as well. But in fact, there is some skill sets that are relevant and important for mentoring. And in fact, for MentoringSG, we tie up with WSQ. So there's a WSQ certification where you can be trained in mentoring. Now, why? Because you also don't want to give bad advice. That's one. You also want to be able to have, a rules of engagement that, for example, if you are not trained, then maybe you dispense some advice which is not so good, or you may cross some lines. And I think there's also a thing to be said where you develop some skills for mentoring, quite in the same way as counseling or para-counseling, right? You take a course. So para-counseling, like I was a para-counselor, I had a course for para-counseling. And if I had just gone to say, oh, you have an issue, a relationship issue, and I wasn't trained, then I wouldn't be so good for you in that particular engagement. So I think, and that's why we have this WSQ certification for mentoring, and we encourage all of our mentors to go through that training. Or if they want to be even more equipped, then please go for the WSQ skills.
So that
Yeah.
makes that individual who goes for the WSQ course in mentoring, there's a marketable skill, right? Which then actually means that it's a commercially viable skill as well. And that also means that people can actually charge for mentoring as a service.
Yeah, so I would also distinguish both, right? As I mentioned earlier on. Let's say our mentor, and I am a mentor. I attend some of these courses, and I attend these courses primarily for the purpose of being a better mentor to my mentees. How do I speak to them if I need to have difficult conversations? How do I broach these conversations? How do I disengage if the relationship becomes a little bit soured, right? So, and then if you were maybe mentoring somebody of opposite sex, what are the boundaries? So that I think these are really important skills. Some would say, okay, I like mentoring, I like the experience, and if, for example, they say, oh, I think I could do this professionally, then I think there are some courses to be life coaches. Then you don't, like we talked about mis-selling, then you don't mis-sell. You are there as a life coach, and you are there to offer a service. And if there's somebody that's willing to pay, then I think there ought to be a willing buyer and a willing seller, because you have those skill sets, you bring a value, and the person who's receiving that, who's the coachee, you call them coachee or somebody who's being coached, ought to pay for that service.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying Wise and Shine so far. I'm your host Reggie, aka your Chief Financial Coconut, and for us to continue to do this show so that you become a tad bit wiser every week, you gotta like, share, subscribe, help us beat the algorithm. But even more importantly, if you can, comment in the comment section below. Let us know your thoughts and also some questions that you would love us to answer. Yep, now back to the show.
MSF set up the SDU unit, social development unit, to help people get married,
hook up, to
right?
hook
To
up.
hook up and get married.
That's the one I got when I was in uni.
Yeah, when you were in uni. And then that was great because government initiative, get people. Of course, they didn't have that good reputation, but that actually helped the private sector set up your kai kai and your coffee meets bagel or whatever. So then SDU said that, oh, we've done our job already, we can close because the private sector is now booming, right? So would you say that this is the same kind of initiative that MentoringSG is trying to achieve? Because you start off with government first, then the private sector, everything gets, people realize that this is a good skill set to have. Then once it booms, then MentoringSG, yes, we've done our job, and then, okay, we can close shop or whatever.
Well, I think there's a little bit of a different thing there. But what I would say for MentoringSG is we are just helping to organize the movement. And they're already existing, as I mentioned, right? Access, Advisory, Astronauts Collective, Growth, and so many others, Yayasan Mendaki and others. So there are so many of these groups already. What we're trying, and they're already doing an incredible job. What we're doing is help it to achieve a network effect.
Like galvanize everyone together.
Exactly. And so bring these people together. They are already very, very passionate about this. We bring it together. We help to connect with industry. And so, for example, you're effectively opening a door. If I were a mentee, and I would just open the door through MentoringSG, and I'll say, wow, there are so many different offerings. You know, if I were younger, I might go to Access. If I wanted more, a different kind of mentoring, I might go to Advisory or Astronauts Collective or Growth or Yayasan Mendaki or so on and so forth. Young Women's Leadership Connection, for example, right? So we just help to open that door as an umbrella, not very restrictive. It's in fact just to coalesce different people, and then you see which ones are most relevant to you at your particular stage of life.
So, MOS Alvin, earlier we talked about fake gurus on the finance side. So I want to ask you, are there any fake gurus on the coaching or mentoring side of things that you have come across as well?
For every different professions, you will have good apples as well as bad apples, right? You could have that in the health sector. You could have, people dispensing not so good health advice. You can have that in the financial sector. And it applies everywhere. So for what we're trying to do with MentoringSG is to curate those which have a certain level of ability, a certain level of reputation. An Advisory, Access, Young Women's Leadership Connection, Astronauts Collective, those are known to us. And like in the marketplace, again, going back to my private sector, in the marketplace, I think we talked about regulation. Then we'll see whether if it is very egregious and where you think that there requires to be legislation or regulation, then I think then we have to come together, debate about this and see whether you want to apply that. Now, I would caution against that because there are some things that you need to regulate. There are some things you need to legislate. But if you apply everything and everything is legislated, then you also run the risk of adding too much friction and stifling this. So, and Singapore has always been good at that, making sure that we study the scope. We try to have, for example, best practices, codes of practice, and also as best as possible, let the market say, these are good ones, these are not so good ones. Please choose the good ones. And if you want to choose the bad ones, you will also have to bear some responsibility. But if there are some things which require legislation and regulation, then we may then work with industry to come in to regulate. But we ought not to be so quick to regulate because then you don't know how that particular service or that particular ecosystem can grow.
One thing about literacy, which I've noticed from my work as a finfluencer, right? And also this was something that one of my bosses used to say to me before, you don't know what you don't know. So especially when it comes to literacy with the different domains, you could be an expert in, let's say, finance, but not digital. That's why even the finance people are being scammed. Because they fall for other things like love scams, psychological tricks rather than the terms and stuff itself, right? But because people don't know what they don't know. The ignorant remain ignorant. Then how is it, or what measures are there? How does this help them? Because if you're someone who wants to get mentored and you can't find a mentor, you want to improve your finances, so you go online and you search whatever your gap is, and you want to fill that by finding out the right sources. But because you don't know how to discern, then you inevitably may end up falling for some of these not so ideal, not so great products. Sometimes there's an actual financial loss, such as paying a fake guru or acting on a fake guru's advice and actually losing money in penny stocks. That was a major hoo-ha a few years ago in the finance space. Or even, let's say, hiring a fake guru life coach who gives very warped advice. How can these people then help themselves?
Yeah. Well, I think it's most important to have a directory, for example, where people can say, well, this is quite legitimate. But even that is not foolproof. So I think what MentoringSG, for example, does is to curate mentors, mentees in a space in which there is some form of also self-affirmation. Yeah. Does it mean that it's 100%? No, it could be in any, even for financial advisors, those that are licensed, right? They can also fall foul. Doesn't mean that you are not, if you are licensed, that means you will not do something wrong. So again, just wearing my MAS and financial hat, for those financial advisors or anyone who is caught for misselling a product and all of that, there will be restriction orders, right? In the financial space, restriction orders. So it doesn't mean that you are regulated, you have a license, that you will not do harm. So again, there's not 100%. But what you can do with regards to like mentoring is, and that's where we come in, right? It's not 100%, but we're just saying these are quite good organizations. We've worked with them. We've seen the work that they've done, and we've seen that they are able to connect mentors and mentees, and there are certain good outcomes. I've challenged the MentoringSG team to say, how do you then measure these outcomes? And one could be, in a way, has a mentoring relationship led, for example, to a job? Has a mentoring relationship led, for example, to a promotion? Has a mentoring relationship led to maybe a change of roles, right? So these are, it's not so intuitive, but I think at least you want to quantify it a little bit and and we're studying that in detail. We talked about that in the National Mentoring Summit last year. And I mentioned earlier on the WSQ certification. That's incredibly important because it gives you some training, it gives you some skills, what to do and what not to do. And it doesn't just apply to mentors. Mentees can also take that, and it teaches you, what kind of advice, how do you discern advice?
Do you have any statistics to share in terms of number of people? It's the third year, right? So since you started, how many mentoring agencies you've had, how many it has grown to in the next
What
3
were
to
the
5
KPIs
years?
hit?
And number of mentee-mentor kind of hookups
With
do you want to
favorable
be having?
outcomes.
Yeah.
Links, yeah. So there are 6,000 mentors and mentees on the platform, and we've worked with over 150 partners, including corporates, and there are also 2,500 trained mentors on MentoringSG. But what we have done last year is to engage an agency to help us to quantify some of these. As I mentioned, right? What are the key metrics? How have these relate? What is basically why it matters, how it matters, and then what can you do as both a mentor and a mentee?
One thing I want to ask is, when it comes to this whole mentoring relationships, a lot of times these are organic. Like it happens maybe because we get put or promoted into a role, change jobs, like you said, and the people around you, it could be your immediate supervisor, it could be a senior colleague. And because of that relationship, a mentoring effect starts to naturally foster, right? And then when you leave, sometimes that's when the mentoring also then stops. Or if you remain friends, then it could still continue into other areas of your life. But there are some people who might not be as lucky, and they do not have that privilege of having someone around them to be their mentor. Let's say even if they go on to MentoringSG and they go for all of these different associations, take part in events, but are still not able to find or click with the right person. Because we like to say, the Gen Z, like I say, must vibe.
That's right.
Yeah, must vibe, So that's
Yes.
very important. And they can't find anyone to vibe with. So let's say they then identify someone who they think could be a good mentor. Maybe they see them on LinkedIn or some magazine interview or something. What would be your advice for these people on how to approach these? Because surely that person would have also be very busy and might not be willing to take on. How can the mentee wannabe go and approach and have that conversation?
Yeah, so I think, and that's where what we're trying to do matters. because number one, I think there are youths that aren't aware about mentoring. That's the first place, right? And so, as you rightly pointed out, Dawn, sometimes it's just a casual coffee. I mean, I did not know the culture in my firm many years ago was have a coffee. I was a junior banker, and they said, have a coffee with an MD, for example, or a VP then. And then that's the culture of my firm. And I realized that helped because then I know a particular MD or VP from a different division, right? Investment division or the investment banking division or the equities division or the securities division, for example, right? And it allows me as a young banker to then have a good overview of the different parts of the firm, understand the different divisions, and also understand what they do. And then it gives me that scope and understanding. But I didn't think of it as mentoring. Over time, then I said, hey, I enjoyed that coffee. I enjoyed asking that person about what they do in the particular business. And then we formed a good relationship, right? And then I hadn't realized that became a mentoring relationship. That could be someone who's not your boss. I've had both mentors who are bosses and mentors who are not bosses, right? And I've been very fortunate. I mean, like all of us, we've had probably very good bosses and also some nightmare bosses, right? So the nightmare bosses, you probably don't want to be mentors, your mentors. But I've had the good bosses. I think they have been very good mentors for me. I haven't thought of them as mentors, but even now when, because some of them are working in the US and others, when they come, we have a cup of coffee and I still ask them things. So you have that long drawn relationship. So I think that gives you that base and entry point to potentially mentoring.
And so far, a lot of these mentorings are really, there's no money tied to it. But like Alex brought up earlier on, we're starting to see some starting to commercialize it. Do you think that as MentoringSG gains more traction and recognition for pushing out this culture, there will inevitably, I'm sure there will be people hopping on this bandwagon and charging and offering paid mentoring services? What is your view on how that's going to develop and if you guys are going to come in and say something?
Yeah, well, like I mentioned earlier, there is a space for coaching. And I think most mentors which we have interacted with, they have full-time jobs or some are retired or some have, their businesses. And what they want to do is they just want to give back, right? So there's not a lot who say, or that we are aware of that says, oh, I'm in it to commercialize it to make a paying thing. And if you want to, then that's your own coaching thing that you want to do. And there is a space for that. Like I said, I think if you offer that service and somebody's willing to pay for that service, I think you should be able to. Like Alex, you are a growth coach, right? I think that's important. And for example, if somebody who's at a particular level in his career wants to be able to say, I want to switch careers or I want to take on a leadership position, why not go to Alex?
So it's a terminology thing, whereas if it's a paid one, it's coaching. But then mentoring still is the old traditional.
I mean, as a coach, sometimes I do, so I wear the hat of coach, mentor as well, but I don't call myself a mentor, I call myself a coach. So depending on the situation, depending on who it is, there will be different ways to approach whatever challenge or struggles that person is experiencing. I think
also
that
put it that way, Alex. I think of a coaching, then I think there's a space for that.
I would then pose this question to you, Alex. So as someone who's in the paid coach or / mentoring space, we are going to use, for the sake of formality, we'll use coach as paid and mentoring as still, contributing, giving back without monetary associations. If someone is like that young chap who reads some of your stuff and wants to learn from you, but does not necessarily have the capital to engage you as a coach, and then just say slides into your DM and say, Joe, you go link kopi, would you say yes?
I have done many actually, right? So sometimes I am a bit more high maintenance. I ask for a pint of beer, not kopi lah.
Okay. So actually that is interesting because guys, then this means that if you're on the mentee side, right, you don't have to be afraid. Like I think a lot of times we're just too afraid to ask. But if, this guy already says, just lim kopi, lim beer. Is that even a term? Just call him out for a beer. And if he has done some of that, I can imagine there probably will be some other paid life coaches who could be open to doing
for sure.
it.
So I think that we all believe and we all understand that mentoring is good and important, right? And we've been talking a lot about the individual seeking mentoring. But if we understand that this is so good and such a powerful tool, how can we advocate this for corporates, right? On your level, right? Is there a template that Mentoring SG can just roll out? Okay, we'll go to your company and we'll train your managers to mentor. Is there something that is available, a low-hanging fruit, for example?
Alex, actually, a lot of companies have already thought that mentoring is very important. They have mentoring schemes already and programs within their company, so in-house. Micron has one, which is the semiconductor firm. I remember, I think Rolls-Royce has one. So that's the aerospace firm. And
Which
then,
brings me to that next question. What are you guys doing to encourage more people to become mentors?
yeah, so I think the value proposition is already there. If you were somebody in a senior role or even just junior or mid level, I think there is a innate human need also to impart. There's an innate human need to it. Not for everyone, but there's something to be said about humans to say, I want to impart something to the next generation, somebody who's younger than me. I mean, I certainly have that. And I always find it very rewarding to either model for somebody or to help give them the opportunity to rise. I find it incredibly fulfilling. And there are many, many, many people whom I've met, both when I was in the private sector and now working with the private sector in my government roles, that also find it incredibly fulfilling.
So you got to start mentoring, Don. Go and
Okay, but
find
I'll say
some-
something. Like I don't even think the word is mentor because I teach people on my social media, right? But because it's not a one-on-one, I do have two mentees, and I call them mentees because they went through my course. I meet them one-on-one. I walk them through their thought processes, and then like I criticize or I say yes, that's right, and then I will just guide them through and teach them how to make their own decisions. So because I have more time and one-on-one with them, then I would call them my mentee.
Not
and
coachee?
it takes but I don't get paid.
Okay, same. Okay.
It's free. Right? So if I count by that definition, like it's mentoring because it's free, right? And then on my social media I also teach, so I would say that's free. But even if, let's say, after today's talk, I do see the purpose and I really have benefited myself from several mentors in my life. A lot of them came from the workplace though. That's where I want to push that next question, which is, for someone who has a lot to contribute and let's say wants to give back to the next generation, but unfortunately is part of the sandwich generation now. You're really just so busy raising your young kids, like you lah, right? Got newborn baby, someone to take care, no helper, and then got elderly parents to take care of and send for appointments as well. It's very hard for them to carve out that time. I know that also sounds like an excuse because it's just a priority. But yet, it's just that mindset, right? And that framing. So for people at that life stage, they may be less inclined to take extra time out of their work. It's easy when it's a workplace, right? Oh yeah, you just come and eat lunch with me during our work timing. But to carve out time after work or on weekends, it might be a bit hard for these people until they have more time on their hands because things change. Yeah, so how can we then, do you think that is just going to be the way it is? We just got to wait for these people to reach that stage where they're willing and have more time to give back? Or do you think there's something that people in this category can do as mentors, maybe like flash mentoring? What are some little ways they can give back without having to make such a big commitment?
You're absolutely right, Dawn, because time is a premium for many people and in the busy parts of our lives. And, I have like 4 jobs, right? I have my MTI job, MCCY job, MAS job, and MP job now. So, but I do feel that mentoring is very, very important. And sometimes I get to, so for example, one of my mentees is now transitioning in his job, right? So I found a space, like half an hour. I just put it in my calendar, and I said, let's sit down. What do you want to do as you transition? I went through with him his LinkedIn profile, for example, and then I said, maybe you want to do this, you want to do that, and then I suggested a few different roles that he might be interested in. And today, I was just walking with him. I just said, why don't we take 5 minutes? We just walk and talk. Earlier this morning, and I said, how did it go? How did your interviews go and everything? Did you, do this? Is there a particular thing that you said and everything? So it can be something like that. Or I have another mentee where I check in from time to time, or he will call me from time to time and he says, do you have 5 minutes? And while I'm, for example, commuting, then I just say, yes, 5 minutes. And then maybe it can be 5, 10, 15 minutes. Then while I'm driving or while I'm commuting, I'm just speaking to him, right? And I say, how's it going? What are you doing? And he says, oh, maybe I want to. It can be something that's personal if he so wants to share, or it could be something related to career. And then I'll just offer my own views. And I said, really up to you whether you want to take it. And some mentor and some mentees are open. Some mentees sometimes they are not. I mean, right? And I think for some you also have to, give the hard truth sometimes. I think that benefits somebody. Yeah. So to Don's question, it doesn't need to be 2 hours a week or something like that. I think if you are a mentee, you would appreciate. I had one person who I think I can. I'm very thankful that I had a chance to be mentored by him, and that is somebody who worked on top of one floor above me when he was in government. That's now President Tharman, and he was the one that asked me to join MAS. And I said, well, SM, I know investment banking. I don't quite know central banking. Can you teach me? And he says, come on up, right? And then I just, from time to time, I just said, do you have 15 minutes? Because he's so busy, right? I said, SM, do you have 15 minutes, 20 minutes? And he'll say, yeah, please come up. Or can we do tomorrow? And I'm mindful of his time because he's so busy. So maybe I take 15 minutes and I say, can you coach me in this? Can you teach me? How do you respond to this? How do you think about these things? How do you carry yourself? And so I'm not imposing on his time. As a mentee, I also want to be respectful of his time. But, for someone like him to give me that valuable 15 minutes, I still remember all of the different advice that he gives me, and I still apply it to this day.
Okay, but to be fair, that could also be the same for many other ministers in your position, right? So then the question, if we turn that back, would SM Tharman then be thinking, I have 20 mentees? Do we need to formalize this relationship? Isn't it just...
I didn't say that. Or I didn't say, hey, SM Tharman, can you be my mentor? I just said, SM Tharman, would you mind giving me 15 minutes?
Right. So sometimes someone could be a mentor without realizing it.
Exactly.
I think that it's a myth, right? That if you're a mentor, you need to spend a lot of time. And it's a myth that if I'm a mentee,
that's right,
I'm taking up a lot of time. So that's one of the myths that we've just dispelled.
That has been very insightful. Thank you for sharing all of this with us. And I think it also is very helpful for anyone who has heard of MentoringSG but isn't really quite sure. Because sometimes, I'm just playing the devil's advocate here. Sometimes government policy feels a bit iffy until you really distill what exactly is that all about. What is it trying to achieve? And like you pointed out today, there are certain measurable outcomes that you guys are gunning for. So if you guys would like to understand more information, would that be to go to the MentoringSG website?
That's right.
And to sign up as a mentee/mentor,
That's
right?
Yeah.
To add to that network. Alex, what else would you like to add on as last words?
I think that great to shed a lot of light on mentoring and MentoringSG. So thank you, MS Alvin. I want to share with our listeners, of course, that if you like today's episode and if you would like to be updated of new episodes that are coming out, do follow us on Wise and Shine, The Financial Coconut, and go to the website www.thefinancialcoconut.com and leave your email there.
And if there are anything else, today we've covered MentoringSG, but if there's anything else that you would like us to dive into, just leave that on the comments and we'll take a look at it. If not, we'll see you guys on the next episode of Wise and Shine. Thank you for tuning in and thank you, Alvin, for joining us. We'll see you then. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. Thanks.